you've referred to this notion as crank the handle theories of economic growth. What are they, and why don't they work in your estimation?
Okay, yes. I've also called it Legoland theory of economic growth. Just assemble the blocks. Right. Okay, so there's a thing called a Cobb-Douglas function, which basically says you put labour and capital together and crank the handle and production comes out, right? Robert Solow, who died not long ago, had this model of economic growth, which is basically the Cobb-Douglas function. You add some parameters in, and which identifies, for example, either labour productivity or multi-factor productivity, depending how you do it, and that will tell you the path of economic growth, right? So once you've identified the level of labour, the level of capital, you've identified the relevant parameters. As long as you get the right rate of productivity growth, away you go, right? Now, the most obvious problem with that model is it predicts that economies will converge. And of course they don't, right? There was a problem with a mathematically expressed model that has a prediction that doesn't come true. It should make you go back and go, something's wrong here.
And when you say converge, this is the expectation that you can equalize the economic outcomes of different countries and regions if you just have the appropriate plan and investment.
Yes, right. So if you have enough capital, enough labour, and you get the productivity growth right, because it's easier to copy inventions already made than be at the cutting edge of economic growth, where you've got to sort of invent new things all the time. Everyone will just look what the rich people are doing, and they will copy the rich people, and everyone will converge as long as they've got enough capital, right? That's the prediction. Obviously, it hasn't come true, right? And I never liked it. I never liked it because it seemed to me that it was obvious that different countries had different capacities to put labour and capital together. We're extracting away from land. Just let's not worry about that for the moment. And even groups within countries had different capacities to put labour and capital together and to generate capital, for that matter. And so it seemed to me it was just not expressing what went actually on, what happened. And then you get things like the gentleman who just got the Nobel Memorial for economics, their point about the institutions really matter. And you look at the Solow model, or even the amended one, which adds in human capital, and you think, yeah, where are institutions in that equation? And the answer is nowhere, really. And now we've got the long-term economic growth literature, where basically what's happened, since we've got this enormous computing power, what various scholars have done is they've just assembled these enormous data sets and then just said, what are the patterns we can find in these data sets, right? What's there? And what they are coming up with is culture matters, back to your previous point. And for example, if you go look at where people are in 1500, and they're relatively developed for 1500, and you follow the people, not the territory, you follow the people, then they're the people who are rich now. Right? So who was rich in 1500? Europe, particularly Northwestern Europe, East Asia, particularly China and Japan. You follow the Europeans, you follow the East Asians. Where they are now is where people are rich, like, for example, Australia or New Zealand or Canada or so forth, right? Singapore, right? Which was nothing, and now is the richest city in the world, or close to the richest city in the world. So, and of course, culture and institutions can't entirely be separated. And there's also all the organizational work, which says, yeah, we tried running an organization we structured for England in this country, and their culture's different, and the organization doesn't work the same, right? Transnational corporations are wrestling with this all the time. And in fact, there's a military analyst called Kenneth Pollock who wrote his PhD thesis on why Arabs lose conventional wars. And he's since updated that into 2 books since, the most recent, which is Armies of Sand. And his thesis was basically their culture leads them to lose conventional wars. Now, insurgencies are different, right? They're a different matter. But when it comes to why they're armies, which look like everyone else's armies, they've got companies, they've got battalions, they've got captains and majors and colonels, and they've got lines of command. Structurally, they look like everyone else's armies. They do badly in conventional warfare because of the way Arab culture works. Now, Arabs can do insurgency warfare. They can definitely do that. But their armies don't work, right? One of the interesting results of this is when you look at Israel, you think it's not that the IDF is all that special. It's just a Western army that gets lots of practice, essentially. Because whenever Western armies fight conventional wars against Arab armies, they beat the tar out of them. And this goes back to culture matters. And where is that in, solo swan growth model, or the updated, I can't remember the 3 people involved, but one's Manacrew, and there's 2 others, I can't remember who they are, model which they've added in human capital, right? It doesn't grasp any of that. Yet clearly this is really, really crucial. And my response is, look, you've got to go back to the beginnings of human economic activity, by which I mean right back to the beginnings, so when we were foragers. And when you look at how foragers operate, there's 3 types of capital which are important. One is human capital, one is physical capital, and one is social capital, right? So physical capital for them is tools. The human capital matters because if you can't make the tools, and if you can't use the tools effectively, it doesn't matter if you have tools or not. Either the tools won't exist or you won't be able to use them. So you have to have the human capital, you have to have the physical capital, but the other thing they do is social capital. Social capital connections are really, really, really important for foragers. So you can have modern foragers who walk everywhere, right? People at the Hasda and so forth in Africa, who can have connections that extend up to 200 kilometres away. Right? And they're mechanisms for information, for buffering yourself against bad times, for arranging marriages. And the one thing every single marriage system in the planet has in common, in fact, the only thing every single marriage system in the planet has in common, is they create in-laws. They create relations by marriage. And that's, in these societies, a really, really, really crucial aspect of marriage. And in fact, it's why courtship, it's a big reason why courtship marriage is not a majority form of marriage in human societies. Because that role of connecting is really, really important. Okay, and we're normative, right? We're a normative species. So you're looking at human capital, social capital, yes, physical capital matters, yeah, about the tools. And you've got to look at the normative landscape. And it turns out you've got to look at the cultural landscape and you've got to look at the institutional landscape, right? This is all going to matter. So if you take, why has foreign aid failed so much? You take capital, you put it into a local area where they don't have the skill base, they don't have the connections you expect, they don't have the institutions that you expect, they're not going to use it in the way you expect. The state is probably going to be a problem, not a benefit, right? Of course, you end up, your foreign aid system not working because it's all based on this idea that, if you just assemble the labour and you assemble the capital and you get the human capital job, you just crank down and it works. That's not how human societies work. That's not how human economic growth happens. Go back to commerce. What's commerce about? Discovery, coordination, risk management, connections, right? You've got to look at all those things. And of course, if you look at it like that, you're not going to expect societies to converge because there's a whole lot of things that are going to have to happen, which are much more than take the labour and take the land and take the capital and put them together and away you go, right? So, and this is where you become skeptical of the sort of just add X command things about economic growth. For example, if you have a really, 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 really regulated land use system, then your land's not going to be moving towards most productive use, is it? if you have a system where you have a lot of interference in activities, like the tech entrepreneur Mark Andreessen has a great example. Why does China dominate the commercial drone market? Because the US FAA decided that you couldn't make a commercial drone in the United States that operated out of line of sight of the operator. Because, something bad might happen. All right. I don't think they worry about that in China. I think they just make drones.